I'm Madeline, 30 years old, and until last month, I thought my life was exactly where it was meant to be. I lived in the same white colonial house where I'd grown up with its black shutters and wide front porch tucked away in a quiet corner of Boston's suburbs. From the outside, everything looked perfect. My parents, David and Eleanor, hosting garden parties and tending to their rose bushes like a portrait of suburban bliss. I'd always been the daughter who never wandered too far, the one who gave up her scholarship to art school because nursing seemed safer, the one who said yes to every family obligation because it felt like the right thing to do. My mom would smile across the dinner table and say, "We're so proud of you, Madeline," and I believed her. I believed in that smile and the comfort of Sunday dinners and the faint scent of my mother's lilacs drifting through the open kitchen window in the summer. I didn't see that comfort was built on sacrifices I never agreed to make. I let them guide my life like I was some fragile porcelain doll they were determined to keep unbroken. In the quiet moments, though, I felt it the ache of all the things I'd left behind. My watercolors packed away in a drawer. The acceptance letter from the Rhode Island School of Design, still pressed between the pages of my old sketchbook, a relic of a life I'd been too scared to choose. My friends had scattered to places like New York, Chicago. Even Berlin, Rachel would send me postcards with wild colors and stories about nights spent dancing under neon lights. "When are you going to live for yourself?" she'd ask, her eyes bright with concern. I'd laugh it off, telling her I was needed here, that family came first. But late at night, when the house was dark and the only sound was the distant hum of passing cars, I'd lie awake and wonder if I was lying to her or to myself. My father's voice had always been so certain art was a hobby, not a life, and my mother's gentle hand on mine was always enough to make me second-guess every flicker of rebellion. So I stayed. I stayed because it was easier than facing the truth I was too afraid to name. And in that silence, in the comforting lie, I'd wrapped around myself like a blanket. I didn't realize that the world I'd built was about to crack open and show me everything I'd been too afraid to see. I thought I'd done everything right. For years, I'd shaped myself to fit the mold my parents had carved for me, silencing the quiet voice inside that wanted something different, something more. But all those carefully measured steps couldn't stop the night everything cracked wide open. It started on the evening of their 35th anniversary party, when the summer twilight painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, and I had spent hours stringing fairy lights around the garden, arranging flowers in crystal vases, making sure every detail was perfect. My mother looked radiant in a pale blue dress, her hair swept up in a graceful twist. My father wore his best suit, the one he reserved for weddings and funerals, and he greeted the guests with a smile that made it easy to believe everything was exactly as it should be. I floated from table to table, refilling glasses and exchanging small talk, telling myself that this was what love looked like. This careful choreography of devotion and sacrifice. As the evening wore on, I slipped into the kitchen to bring out the cake, a towering confection of buttercream and berries that I'd spent days planning. I paused for a moment by the window, my hands resting on the marble counter, and that's when I heard them. My parents seated in the garden gazebo with their oldest friends, laughing softly over their drinks. At first, it was just background noise, the hum of conversation I'd heard all my life. But then my name floated to me on the warm night air, and everything stilled. "Madeline is a good daughter," Mrs. Harrison said, her voice kind. "You're so lucky she stayed close, so many kids run off these days." My father's laugh was low and weary. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been if she hadn't." My breath caught in my throat. "David," my mother began, but he waved her off with a small, dismissive gesture. "No, Eleanor, let's be honest. We had plans once, dreams of moving to California, of traveling the world. But then Madeline came along, and we did what we had to do." My mother's sigh was soft, wistful. "I remember packing for that job in Switzerland. We were so young, so sure we'd see everything. But then I found out I was pregnant, and everything changed." The words dropped into the quiet of the night, like stones, each one pulling me deeper into a darkness I hadn't known was there. "I love her," my father said quickly, as if that would make it better. "Of course we do, but you can love someone and still see how they changed everything." My hands trembled on the counter, fingers numb. I had spent my whole life trying to make them proud to be the daughter they deserved, and in that one moment, I heard the truth: I had never been what they wanted. I stumbled back the cake box, slipping from my grasp, and shattering on the floor a mess of frosting and broken porcelain. But even as tears blurred my vision, I couldn't tear myself away from the window. We never pushed her to leave. My mother continued, her voice so calm it made my stomach twist. She wanted to stay, and we let her. It felt wrong to push her away, but sometimes I wish we'd taken that chance to live our own lives. My father sighed, and the weight of it seemed to settle over me like a shroud. We all make our choices, he said. Some of them stay with us forever. I stumbled to the bathroom, heart pounding in my chest, the voices of my parents echoing in my ears. I pressed my hands to the cool tile, tears streaming down my cheeks as I saw every memory, every moment of my life rewritten in that confession. My choice to stay had never been about love. It had been about guilt, their regret. And I was the living reminder of everything they'd given up. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I saw myself not as their perfect daughter, but as a woman who had built her life around a lie. My mind raced with questions, with the sudden desperate need to reclaim the pieces of myself I had buried for them. But before I could figure out how to begin, I knew one thing for certain: I would never see my home or my parents the same way again. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever uncovered a truth that changed everything? If you're as invested in this journey as I am, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and join me for more powerful stories of resilience and self-discovery. The days that followed that devastating night were a blur of forced normalcy and quiet desperation. My parents carried on as if nothing had happened, as if their confessions hadn't cracked open the foundation of everything I thought we shared. Each morning, I'd watch my father sip his coffee and flip through the paper, his voice calm, as he mentioned the weather or a neighbor's new dog, and I'd feel that sickening ache in my chest, the echo of those words. We had dreams, but Madeline came along. My mother would move through the kitchen, with her usual graceful precision, chopping vegetables for dinner or folding laundry with that distant look in her eyes. And I played along because I didn't know what else to do. I needed time to figure out what came next, to decide whether I could ever face them with the truth I'd heard. But the real betrayal was still waiting for me, a darker thread weaving through the fabric of my family's carefully constructed story. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old paperwork in the hall closet, trying to decide what to keep, what to let go, I found a thick envelope tucked behind a stack of tax records. My name was written on it in my father's precise slanted script, and something about the weight of it made my fingers go cold. Inside were copies of property documents, emails, and notes I'd never seen before. My breath caught as I read line after line: plans to sell the house to divide the proceeds between my parents and Ethan, my older brother, who'd always lived life on his own terms, while I stayed behind to hold everything together. The emails were dated months ago, long before the anniversary party. In them, my father wrote to Ethan about how they could finally start fresh once the house sold. My mother's notes were colder still, laying out expenses and plans for a new condo in Florida, a dream they'd never mentioned to me. The worst part was Ethan's casual replies, filled with jokes about how I'd probably be too caught up in my routines to notice what they were planning. Madeline will be fine, he'd written in one email. She's always been the obedient one. My hands shook as I read that line over and over, the betrayal of it cutting deeper than anything I'd heard in the garden. They weren't just talking about a hypothetical future. They'd been actively plotting to erase me from the life I'd built for them. I'd spent years holding this family together, believing that was my purpose. I'd sacrificed dreams I never let myself fully feel, telling myself love meant compromise. But love isn't manipulation, and family isn't meant to be the rope that binds you to someone else's regrets. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the documents spread out around me, the truth pressing in on all sides. My parents' laughter from the garden party echoed in my head, mingling with Ethan's careless words. She's always been the obedient one. They'd counted on that, on my quiet compliance. They'd turned my loyalty into a weapon against me. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, hot and relentless. For so long, I'd buried every flicker of rebellion, every impulse to run under layers of duty and love. But I saw now that love without respect is just another kind of cage. In the morning, I packed the documents back into the envelope and placed it in the bottom drawer of my dresser. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. When my father came home that evening, whistling under his breath, like he hadn't already written me out of the life we shared, I looked at him and felt nothing but cold determination. I wouldn't let them take my future the way they'd taken my past. In the weeks that followed, I began gathering my own evidence receipts for every home improvement project I'd done, journals documenting the hours I'd spent making their house shine, photographs of the garden I'd planted and nurtured. They thought I was too quiet to fight back, too careful to make waves. But they didn't know what I'd learned that night in the garden, how betrayal can become a fuel, how a lifetime of being silenced can turn into the fiercest resolve. And so, with every quiet act of preparation, I built my plan brick by brick, determined that when the time came, they would see the daughter they thought they could break was far stronger than they'd ever imagined. The plan I was building in those quiet moments became the lifeline I clung to, a whispered promise to myself that I wouldn't let them rewrite my story. I spent my days playing the part of the dutiful daughter, moving through the house with a calm expression and steady hands, while inside, I felt like a storm had taken root in my chest. My father still spoke to me in the same measured tones, his eyes crinkling in practiced affection whenever he asked about my day. My mother's soft voice still offered gentle reminders. Pick up milk at the store, Madeline, don't forget the dry cleaning. But I saw every word for what it was, now a performance layered over the casual betrayal they'd hidden behind their smiles. Each evening after they went to bed, I'd pull out the envelope I'd hidden in my dresser drawer and read through the documents again, committing every line to memory. I felt the weight of them in my hands, like a promise, a reminder of the life they'd planned to carve out without me. I started making copies, scanning every email and legal note into my laptop, organizing them by date, by detail, by every cold-cutting sentence that told me exactly where I stood in their world. In the daylight, I gathered my own evidence photographs of the house I'd restored with my own two hands, the garden I'd coaxed into bloom with hours of sweat and dirt under my nails. I found every receipt, every permit I'd filed, every scrap of paper that proved my work. I knew they'd try to deny it when I finally confronted them. My parents had always been good at rewriting the past in their own favor, but I was done letting their version of the story stand unchallenged. My brother Ethan texted me one afternoon, as if nothing had changed. "Hey Mads, coming to the lake this weekend?" His tone was light, familiar, the way it had always been. But I couldn't see his name without hearing those words from his email. She's always been the obedient one, and I felt a surge of fury so sharp it nearly took my breath away. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned my attention to the lawyer's office downtown. I'd found his name in a quiet corner of the internet, an advocate for people who'd been cut out of family estates, who specialized in cases where blood ties had become just another way to trap someone in obligations they'd never agreed to. Sitting across from him in his small wood-paneled office, I laid out every piece of evidence I'd gathered. My voice didn't shake as I spoke. My hands didn't tremble. I told him everything: the overheard confession at the party, the envelope hidden in the closet, the years of labor I'd poured into a house my parents never truly meant to share with me. He listened carefully, his lined face impassive, but his eyes sharp. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Madeline, you have more than enough to make them answer for this. The question is, what do you want?" I took a breath, feeling the answer rise from the deepest part of me. "I want them to see me," I said. "I want them to understand that I'm not just a footnote in their story. I want them to know I'm done being the obedient one." He nodded once, and that simple gesture felt like a spark catching in the dark. We began drafting the first letter, a formal notice of my intent to claim my share, to demand the acknowledgement I'd earned with every nail I'd driven and every hour I'd given up to hold their world together. I signed it with a steady hand, sealing it in an envelope that felt like the first stone thrown through the glass walls of their carefully curated life. That night, back at the house, I laid awake listening to the quiet creak of the old floorboards, the low murmur of my parents' voices in the next room. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't see the way I'd stopped flinching under the weight of their expectations. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was taking back what they'd tried to steal from me. The next morning, I watched my father leave for work, his coffee in hand, his expression calm and unbothered. My mother hummed in the kitchen as she folded towels, unaware that the first blow had already landed. And as I stood there in the soft morning light, I felt a strange, fierce peace settle in my chest. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I was the woman who was going to make them see me, even if it meant tearing down the walls of everything we'd ever pretended to be. The day the letter arrived at my parents' door, everything changed. My father's measured tone faltered for the first time, his eyes scanning the formal language that spelled out exactly what I was demanding: acknowledgement, compensation, and the truth they'd never dared to face. My mother's lips parted in a silent gasp. As she read the words, her shoulders stiffening under the weight of what I'd unleashed. They didn't say a word to me that morning. Instead, they retreated behind the polite walls they'd always used to contain any crack in the family facade. But the silence between us felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. I spent those days moving through the house with quiet determination, each footstep a small act of defiance. My father tried to pretend nothing had shifted, mentioning weather reports and grocery lists in the same even tone, but his fingers drummed nervously on the kitchen table. My mother's smile was tight, the light in her eyes flickering whenever she caught my gaze. I knew they were scared not of me exactly, but of the mirror I was holding up to their carefully constructed story. The lawyer had warned me that they'd push back, that they'd try to frame me as the ungrateful child, the daughter, who had turned on the family out of greed. He was right. My parents sent their own letter in response, carefully worded to sound reasonable. They claimed the house was theirs alone, that I'd contributed nothing but moral support, as if every hour I'd spent sanding floors and repainting walls had been nothing but a hobby. My father's words, so polite on paper, cut deeper than any shout could have. "We love Madeline dearly," he wrote, "but this has gone too far." My mother's name was there too, her elegant signature, an echo of the hand that used to braid my hair and smooth my blankets at night. But I didn't waver. I gathered every photograph, every receipt, every time-stamped file that proved the truth of what I'd built. When the date for the first court hearing arrived, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, the envelope of evidence clutched in my hand. My parents were already there, seated at the long oak table with their attorney, a man with cold eyes and a smooth voice who spoke like he'd already decided the outcome. My father wouldn't meet my gaze. My mother's face was pale, her hands twisting a tissue in her lap. I took my seat across from them and felt a strange calm settle over me, the quiet power of knowing I had nothing left to hide. The judge listened as each side laid out the case, my father's voice, careful and rehearsed, as he painted a picture of a daughter who'd misunderstood, who'd let resentment fester into something ugly. I let him speak. I let him try to reshape the narrative one last time. And then I opened the folder and laid out every page of proof, the invoices for materials I'd bought, the photographs of my work, the emails that spoke of plans made behind my back. My lawyer spoke with calm precision, weaving the pieces together into a story that was undeniable. In that quiet courtroom, the truth stood bare, unadorned by the excuses my parents had leaned on for so long. I saw it in the way my father's shoulders sagged as the judge read through the documents, in the way my mother's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hide. They tried to interrupt, to protest, but the judge held up a hand. "The evidence is clear," he said, his voice steady. "Madeline has every right to pursue her claim." My breath caught in my throat at those words, the final confirmation that I hadn't imagined it all. I'd always been the obedient daughter, the peacemaker, the one who never wanted to cause a scene. But in that moment, I felt the full weight of my own strength, the quiet certainty that had carried me this far. After the hearing, my parents didn't speak to me as we walked out into the bright afternoon light. My father's jaw was tight, his steps quick as he moved ahead. My mother paused just long enough to look at me, her eyes searching for something she couldn't name. I didn't offer her the comfort I once would have. I turned and walked away, the sun warm on my face, the courthouse doors closing softly behind me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. I was ready for what came next. The victory in court was supposed to feel like a triumph, a moment of clarity and justice that would wash away the years of quiet sacrifice. And it did, at least in the sterile confines of the courtroom, with the judge's words echoing in my head like a promise finally kept. But the days that followed were anything but simple. My parents didn't speak to me, not directly. My father's footsteps echoed through the house like a ghost, and my mother moved around me in the kitchen as if I were just another piece of furniture she'd grown tired of dusting. Ethan called me once, his voice clipped and cold. "You've done enough damage, Mads," he said. "Can't you just let it go?" But I couldn't not, when I'd spent so long bearing every flicker of who I was, to keep the peace in a family that had never seen me for more than what I could provide. The settlement came quickly after the hearing, my share of the house, the money I was owed, for the years of labor I'd poured into making it a home. It should have been enough to make me feel safe, to let me breathe easier. But as I packed up my things, every box felt like a small funeral. Each room I'd painted, each flower bed I'd tended, it all felt like a testament to a version of myself I was leaving behind. My father tried once, just once, to soften the blow. One morning, he knocked on my bedroom door, his face drawn and tired. "Madeline," he said, his voice rough, with something that might have been regret. "We never wanted this. We just wanted what was best for everyone." I looked at him, then really looked at him, and saw not the towering figure of my childhood, but a man who had spent his whole life trying to outrun his own disappointments. "You wanted what was best for you," I said quietly, "and you never asked what was best for me." He didn't argue. He just closed the door, and I knew that was the last conversation we'd ever have about it. My mother cried when I left, silent tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched me carry out the last of my boxes. She didn't offer to help. She didn't ask me to stay. And that silence hurt more than any of the words they'd spoken in anger. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, a modest place with creaky floors and wide windows that let in the early morning light. The first night there, I sat on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, listening to the hush of the city outside my window. For the first time in years, I felt the steady thrum of my own heart unburdened by the weight of someone else's dreams. I spent those early weeks in a haze of small victories, hanging my watercolors on the walls, cooking dinner for myself, in a tiny kitchen that smelled like freedom. At night, I'd stand by the window and watch the headlights sweep down the street, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd chosen this life, that every piece of it was mine alone. But the cost of that choice lingered in the quiet spaces of my mind. My phone buzzed with messages from family friends, people I'd known since I was a child. Some offered condolences, others offered opinions. "You know your parents meant well," one woman wrote, as if good intentions could erase the cold calculation of what they'd done. I didn't answer. I couldn't explain to them what it meant to spend your life as a placeholder for someone else's dreams, how it felt to finally claim space that had always belonged to you, but never felt safe to take. Ethan sent one last message, a bitter line that made me close my eyes and breathe deep. "You won," he wrote. "Hope it was worth it." And in that moment, I realized it was. Because winning wasn't about the money or the house, it was about refusing to be erased. It was about seeing myself not as an extension of someone else's choices, but as a woman who could stand alone in the quiet of her own space and know that she was enough. I don't know what comes next, not exactly. But I do know this: for the first time in my life, I am living on my own terms. And even if the future is uncertain, that knowledge feels like the truest kind of freedom. 6 months have passed since I walked away from the life I once thought was mine, and each sunrise since then has felt like a quiet promise. My apartment, small and sunlit, has become a reflection of the woman I'm still learning to be. There's a watercolor of a lighthouse I painted in the first weeks here, a symbol of the strength I found in guiding myself home when no one else would. The pain of what I left behind still flickers in the corners of my mind, but it no longer defines me. My parents and I speak in cautious, clipped phrases, now polite but distant. There are no more illusions between us, no more carefully curated performances. My mother's apologies come in small gestures, care packages of tea and honey, handwritten notes that try to bridge a chasm words alone can't mend. My father says less than ever, his silence as heavy as the confessions I once heard him spill in the garden. And Ethan, he's vanished from my world entirely, leaving behind only the echo of his disbelief and the cold finality of his last message. I've come to realize that not every fracture needs to be healed. Some are meant to remind us of who we were and who we'll never be again. In this new life, I've learned that freedom is not the absence of pain, but the presence of choice. I've filled the empty corners of my days with things that feel like mine: long walks at dawn, small canvases blooming with color, the simple satisfaction of cooking dinner for myself in a kitchen where every meal is an act of quiet independence. Some nights, I still stand by the window and think of the home I left, but the weight of that place no longer crushes me. Instead, it feels like a chapter closed, a story I survived. My journey isn't over. I know there will be more storms to weather, more doubts to silence. But for the first time, I trust that I have everything I need within me to meet whatever comes next. If you've ever stood at the edge of a life you didn't choose and decided to claim your own, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below, and if you're finding strength in these words, don't forget to subscribe and walk this path with me.